Hey, everybody, welcome to another deep dive with us.
It's great to be here.
And, today we're diving into a book that has really taken the language learning world by storm.
Fluent forever. Yeah.
Fluent Forever by Gabriel Wyner. And, we talk a lot about language learning on this show and lots of different approaches and methods.
Right.
And I think this one is especially interesting because it kind of takes a different approach than some of the others we've looked at.
It really does.
So I'm excited to dig in and see what we can unearth.
Me too.
And for our listeners who might not be familiar with Gabriel Wyner, he's kind of got a unique background.
He does.
He's actually an opera singer.
That's right.
And he really struggled with language learning for his career.
Yeah. As an opera singer, you're performing in different languages.
Right. You have to.
Italian, German, French, all sorts of different languages.
Yeah.
So he had to kind of come up with his own method to learn these languages quickly and effectively.
And he has a really funny anecdote in the book about how he cheated on a French placement test.
Yeah, I remember that.
To get into a higher level class.
Yeah.
But he actually couldn't understand anything that was going on.
Right.
But it really illustrates how much he wanted to learn languages effectively and quickly.
He just wanted to get to that point where he could actually use the language, not just kind of fake it till you make it.
Yeah, exactly. And so in this deep dive, we're really going to be focusing on his 3 keys to language learning and how they kind of build on each other.
That sounds great.
So are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So the first key, and this one might surprise some people, is pronunciation.
Yeah, a lot of people think you should start with grammar or vocabulary.
Right, that's the most important thing.
But Wyner says no, pronunciation is key.
Yeah, he makes a really compelling argument for why you should master the sounds of language before you even dive into grammar or vocab.
And it makes sense when you think about his background as a singer. He knows how important it is to be able to produce those sounds accurately.
And he even talks about this idea that by focusing on pronunciation first, you're essentially training your ear to pick up on nuances that you might otherwise miss.
Yeah, you're fine-tuning your listening skills.
Right. And then that can make a huge difference later on when you're trying to understand native speakers.
Exactly. And he also brings up this really interesting point about how we actually lose the ability to hear certain sounds as we grow up.
What?
Yeah, unless those sounds are in our native language.
Oh, so it's like our brains get lazy and just kind of tune out the sounds that we don't need.
Right, exactly. And that can lead to what he calls broken words.
Broken words.
Yeah, basically words that we mispronounce in our heads because we're trying to force them into our existing sound system.
Huh. Okay. I've never thought about it that way, but I can see how that would happen.
Yeah, and he gives this funny example in the book about the word scheme.
Scheme?
Yeah, he thought it was pronounced sheem for years.
Oh, what?
And it wasn't until he started really focusing on pronunciation that he realized he'd been saying it wrong this whole time.
So he had this broken word in his head for years.
Exactly. And he says this happens to all of us, especially when words look similar across languages but have different pronunciation rules.
Oh, yeah, I can totally relate to that. I remember when I was learning German, I kept mispronouncing the word gift because it looks so similar to the English word.
Right.
But the G is pronounced completely differently.
Exactly. And those kinds of mispronunciations can really hold you back because they create a barrier between the written and spoken language.
It's just like you're not even speaking the same language anymore.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's why Wyner says it's so important to fix those broken words early on.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, he recommends a technique called minimal pair testing.
Minimal pair testing.
Yeah, so you basically practice listening to and distinguishing between pairs of words that differ by just one sound.
Okay, so like rock and lock,
Exactly.
or sheep and
Yeah, and it can be really challenging at first, but it's incredibly effective for rewiring your brain to hear those subtle differences.
That's so cool that we can actually retrain our ears to hear sounds that we thought we'd lost.
It is, and it's crucial for connecting the written and spoken forms of the language, which is essential for fluency.
Okay, so pronunciation first, got it.
But it doesn't stop there.
Oh, there's more.
Wyner also argues that developing a good accent early on is equally important.
Oh, I can see why a good accent can definitely make a difference in how well you're understood and how you're perceived by native speakers.
Absolutely, and it can also boost your confidence.
Yeah, but practicing pronunciation can be so intimidating, especially when you're first starting out.
I know what you mean. I used to be so self-conscious about my accent.
Like you're worried about sounding silly or making mistakes.
Exactly. But Wyner encourages us to embrace that challenge and not be afraid to experiment with different sounds.
Yeah, he says that a good accent is all about understanding the mechanics of how sounds are made.
right? Like the position of your tongue, your lips, your vocal cords.
It's like understanding the ingredients of a recipe before you start cooking.
Exactly. And he even compares it to learning a musical instrument.
Oh, yeah.
You need to practice those techniques and those movements in order to produce those sounds accurately.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we actually learn all those tongue-twisting details?
Well, that's where the International Phonetic Alphabet comes in.
The IPA.
Yeah, it might sound intimidating, but it's actually just a tool for decoding the sounds of any language.
Oh, so it's not about memorizing a bunch of complex terminology.
Not at all. It's about understanding the physical process of making those sounds.
Okay, so it's like a pronunciation cheat sheet for any language.
Exactly. And Wyner provides a really helpful IPA decoder chart in his book.
Oh, that's great.
And there are even videos on his website that break it down in really simple terms.
So he's really trying to demystify this whole pronunciation thing, which I appreciate.
He is, and he also emphasizes this really interesting concept that he calls eye training.
Eye training? What's that?
It's about recognizing the visual patterns in a language similar to how you might spot patterns in math or music.
Okay.
And he uses the French word mère, meaning mother, as an example.
Okay.
So by connecting the spelling, like that accent mark over the E,
Yeah.
to the grammar, it being a feminine noun,
Right.
to the meaning mother,
Uh-huh.
you create a stronger memory link.
It's like those find the difference puzzles.
Exactly.
Once you see how the pieces fit together, it just clicks.
Precisely. And the best part is as you learn more elements of the language, this process actually becomes easier
Oh, that's encouraging.
because everything starts to connect and reinforce each other.
That's great. So it sounds like we're laying a really strong foundation with pronunciation before we even move on to vocabulary and grammar.
Exactly like building a house, you need that solid foundation.
And speaking of vocabulary, that's actually Wyner's second key to language learning. And he has this really interesting concept that he calls the symphony of a word.
The symphony of a word. I love that.
Yeah, it sounds kind of poetic, doesn't it?
It does, but it basically highlights the idea that words are more than just labels.
Okay.
They carry layers of sound, meaning grammar, and even personal associations.
Oh, I can see that. Like, for example, the word dog in English conjures up all these images and feelings and even cultural references.
Exactly, but if you simply translate the word dog into another language, you lose all those rich layers.
Right. It's not just about the literal meaning. It's about all those connotations and nuances.
Exactly, and that's why Wyner cautions against relying too heavily on translation. He wants us to connect directly with the meaning of words in the target language to experience them in their full symphonic glory.
Okay, so where do we even begin building this vocabulary foundation? Do we need to memorize the entire dictionary?
Thankfully, no.
Okay.
Wyner suggests starting with the most frequent words in a language, not necessarily the most complex ones.
Okay, so like the words that you're going to encounter most often in everyday conversation.
Exactly, and he actually learned this the hard way.
Oh, tell me more. I love a good language learning mishap story.
Well, he actually got placed into an advanced French class based on his ability to passionately rant about politics.
Oh, really?
Even though he barely knew any basic French.
Wow, so he could talk the talk, but he couldn't walk the walk?
Exactly. But it proves his point that starting with practical vocabulary is more important than sounding like a philosopher.
Right. So how do we know which words are the most frequent?
Well, Wyner recommends using frequency dictionaries.
Frequency dictionaries, okay.
Yeah, which lists the most commonly used words in a language, and he even provides a curated list of 625 common concrete words in his book.
Wow, that's incredibly helpful, especially for beginners who might feel overwhelmed by the sheer number of words in a new language.
Absolutely. It's all about starting with a solid base and building from there.
And those are words that are easy to visualize, right?
Exactly. They're concrete nouns, verbs, adjectives, things that you can easily picture in your mind.
That's great. And Wyner being Wyner, he also suggests some pretty unconventional methods for learning vocabulary.
Oh, yeah. He's all about making it fun and engaging.
Like what?
Well, one of his favorite tools is actually Google Images.
Wait, Google Images.
I know it sounds strange, but it's actually quite clever.
Okay, I'm listening.
He argues that the captions on images provide real-world usage examples and nuanced meanings that you might not get from a traditional dictionary.
Okay, so instead of just memorizing a dry definition, I'm actually seeing the word in action in its natural habitat.
Exactly, and it can be really eye-opening.
Yeah, like taking a virtual field trip into the language.
Precisely, and he gives a great example using the Russian word devushka, which means girl.
Okay.
So if you search for devushka on Google Images, you'll see a variety of pictures and captions that reveal the cultural context and connotations of the word.
Oh, so it's not just about the literal translation. It's about understanding how the word is actually used in real life.
Exactly, and that can make a huge difference in your understanding of the language.
Wow, I never thought about using Google Images for language learning, but it's actually brilliant.
It is, and it's just one example of how Wyner encourages us to think outside the box and find creative ways to learn.
So we've talked about pronunciation and vocabulary, two of the key building blocks of language learning.
Right.
But what about the big bad wolf of language learning, grammar?
Yes, grammar, the one that often trips people up.
Exactly. So how does Wyner approach this seemingly daunting task?
Well, he has some very interesting ideas about that, which we'll delve into in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks. We're just getting started. Hashtag TTS, the deep dive episode 2024-11-22, part 2 of 3.
Welcome back, everyone. Ready to tackle that grammar beast?
Oh, I'm ready for a wrestling match.
Well, Wyner's approach might surprise you. He argues that we often overcomplicate grammar.
Overcomplicate it?
Yeah, he says we already have this powerful language machine in our brains.
Like from when we were kids.
Exactly. We learned our native language effortlessly without even thinking about grammar rules.
True.
So the key is to reactivate that language machine. And the way to do that is through comprehensible input.
Comprehensible input.
Yeah, basically means understanding the gist of what you're hearing or reading, even if you don't catch every single word.
So like watching a movie with subtitles, even if I don't understand every line of dialogue, I can still follow the plot.
Exactly. That's a perfect analogy. And by consistently giving our brains this comprehensible input, we're feeding our language machine the raw materials it needs to start making those grammatical connections.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light, but grammar can still feel pretty overwhelming.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin?
Wyner says forget those daunting grammar textbooks and focus on 3 core elements: word order,
Okay.
word forms, and function words.
Word order, word forms, and function words.
Got it.
Can you break those down a bit further for me?
Sure. So word order refers to how subjects, verbs, and objects are arranged in a sentence.
Okay.
Word forms refer to how verbs are conjugated and nouns are declined. And function words are those little words like the, of, and to that connect everything together.
So instead of getting bogged down in the technicalities of a specific grammar rule, I should be looking at the sentence as a puzzle and figuring out how these 3 elements work together to create meaning.
That's a great way to think about it. And by understanding these 3 core elements, you can unlock the meaning of any sentence.
That's empowering. It makes grammar seem a lot less intimidating. But how do we go beyond simply understanding grammar to actually using it correctly?
Well, Wyner has a unique solution for that: storytelling.
Storytelling.
Yeah, he argues that simply memorizing verb conjugation charts is like trying to remember a phone number without associating it with a person.
It's just a bunch of random numbers.
Exactly. It's dry and ineffective.
Yeah, I'm terrible at remembering numbers unless I can connect them to something meaningful.
Right. So instead of just memorizing grammar rules, Wyner suggests creating personalized stories around them. He gives the example of a simple sentence like, she is a doctor.
Okay, what kind of story could you create around that?
Well, you can imagine a woman, who's a doctor, or invent a character and create a mini narrative around her patients, the hospital where she works.
Oh, I see. By creating that story.
Yeah.
I'm not just memorizing the grammatical structure,
Yeah.
but embedding it in a context that makes it memorable.
Exactly. It's like giving those dry grammar rules a personality and a life of their own.
And this technique can be applied to all sorts of grammar rules, right?
Absolutely. Instead of just memorizing the rules for forming the past tense, you could create a story about a wild adventure you had last weekend, using the past tense to describe all the exciting events.
That's brilliant. It's like turning grammar practice into creative writing.
Yeah.
But what about those really tricky grammar concepts that just won't stick even with stories?
For those stubborn grammar gremlins, Wyner recommends mnemonics.
Mnemonics, those memory tricks.
Exactly, and not just any mnemonics, but a system borrowed from memory champions called the Person Action Object, or PAO system.
PAO system. Okay, that sounds intriguing, but also kind of complicated.
It might sound complex, but it's actually quite simple to use. It allows you to create these multi-layered mnemonics for anything, even the most convoluted grammar rules. And the secret ingredient, the more vivid, even absurd the image, the better.
So instead of trying to remember a boring grammar rule, I could picture a giant panda writing a...
Well, Wyner's approach to grammar is designed to help you move beyond simply understanding grammar rules to actually using them fluently in real-life situations.
So it's not about passing a grammar test. It's about being able to communicate confidently and spontaneously in your target language.
Precisely. And that brings us to the final stage of Wyner's method, which focuses on active language use. He says fluency goes beyond memorization. It's about using the language actively and creatively.
I love that. It's about moving beyond the textbooks and exercises and actually putting your language skills into practice in the real world.
Exactly. And he shares a personal story about being forced to improvise in German when he forgot a crucial word during a performance.
Oh, no, that sounds nerve-wracking.
It was, but he says those moments of struggle actually led to breakthroughs in his fluency.
So it's like we learn by doing. We have to push ourselves outside our comfort zone.
Exactly. And Wyner emphasizes the importance of embracing those challenges and resisting the urge to fall back on English.
And it's about finding ways to express yourself, even if it's imperfect at first.
Right. And to help you practice speaking, he recommends exploring language exchange communities.
Oh, like those online platforms where you can connect with native speakers?
Exactly. He suggests platforms like Live Mocha Italki and Hello Talk, where you can find language partners who want to learn your language.
It's a win-win situation. You get to help someone else learn your language, and you get to practice your target language with a native speaker.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And beyond those online platforms, Wyner also encourages us to seek out opportunities for real-world interactions, whether it's joining a conversation group, attending cultural events, or even just striking up a conversation with someone at a local cafe.
It's about immersing yourself in the language as much as possible.
Exactly. And speaking of immersion, Wyner also emphasizes the importance of setting long-term goals and customizing your vocabulary based on your individual needs and interests.
Because learning a language can feel overwhelming if you try to learn everything at once.
Right. But if you focus on the words and phrases that are relevant to your life, it becomes much more manageable and enjoyable. He talks about building a core vocabulary of the most frequent words in a language.
Which gives you a good foundation.
Exactly. But then he encourages you to branch out and explore specialized vocabulary based on your own passions and goals.
So if you're a foodie, you might focus on culinary terms.
Exactly. Or if you're a music lover, you might delve into musical vocabulary.
It's about making the language relevant to your life.
Right.
And tailoring your learning to your specific needs.
Precisely. And to illustrate this concept, he gives the example of reading a scientific text. You might understand 80% of the words with the general vocabulary, but for deeper comprehension, you'll need those specialized terms.
What's having the right tools for the job?
Exactly. And when it comes to expanding your vocabulary, Wyner has another interesting suggestion: monolingual dictionaries.
Monolingual dictionaries, I've always found those a bit intimidating. Isn't it easier to just use a bilingual dictionary?
While bilingual dictionaries can be helpful for beginners, Wyner argues that monolingual dictionaries are essential for developing deeper fluency. They force you to think in the target language.
I can see that. It's like relying on a crutch.
Exactly. And while monolingual dictionaries might seem daunting at first, Wyner suggests starting with simple words and gradually working your way up. He also recommends using tools like Google Translate to help you understand the definitions.
Okay, so it's not about diving into the deep end without any floaties.
Not at all. It's about gradually increasing the difficulty as you progress. And speaking of challenges, Wyner is also a big advocate for reading authentic materials in the target language, even if it seems scary at first.
Reading in a foreign language can be intimidating, especially when you're first starting out.
I agree, but he suggests starting with a familiar story, maybe a translation of a book you've already read or a book that's been adapted into a movie.
Oh, that's a good idea.
That familiarity can help you stay engaged and make it easier to follow along. And to reinforce your reading comprehension and pronunciation, he recommends listening to audiobooks while you read.
It's like having a native speaker whispering the words in your ear.
Exactly. And for those of us who enjoy relaxing on the couch, Wyner has another suggestion for improving listening comprehension: watching TV and movies in the target language.
Oh, I love that idea.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, I'm pretty reliant on subtitles.
Subtitles can be helpful at first, but Wyner encourages us to gradually wean ourselves off of them.
It's like training wheels for your ears.
Exactly. He suggests starting with familiar shows, maybe ones you've already seen in English, or reading episode summaries beforehand. As you get more comfortable, you can move on to more challenging content like films and podcasts.
So it's about gradually increasing the difficulty and challenging our listening skills.
Precisely. And by doing so, you'll steadily improve your comprehension and develop a natural ear for the language.
This is also encouraging. It sounds like Wyner's approach is all about finding those enjoyable, immersive experiences that help us internalize the language.
Exactly. He's all about making language learning an adventure rather than a chore.
And speaking of adventure, we're about to embark on the final leg of our journey through Fluent Forever. In Part 3, we'll explore the tools and resources Wyner recommends for supercharging your language learning, and we'll leave you with some final thoughts to ponder as you embark on your own language learning quest. #TTS, the Deep Dive episode 2024-11-22, part 3 of 3. All right, we are back. And I, for one, am ready to supercharge my learning.
Me too. Let's talk tools and resources.
Yes, let's dive into those because, we've built the house, we've got the foundation, we've got the walls and the roof.
Right.
What are we putting inside?
Well, first off, got to organize all the stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And Wyner's a huge fan of these spaced repetition systems.
The SRS.
Exactly.
Yeah, those are pretty cool. I mean, flashcards on steroids?
Yeah, they use these algorithms to figure out when you need to review what.
Right, like it's paying attention to what you're forgetting and what you're not.
Exactly. So you're not wasting time on stuff you already know.
Right. And his go-to is Anki, right?
Yeah, Anki's great. It's free. It's user-friendly. You can use it on your phone, your computer.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about Anki.
And for those who prefer something a little more old school, there's always the Lightner Box.
Oh, yeah, the Lightner Box. That's like the OG spaced repetition system.
It is. You've got your index cards, different boxes, moving them around based on how well you remember them.
It's like a little game.
It is. It's fun.
Okay, so Anki, Lightner Box, both good options for really cementing that vocabulary and grammar.
And don't forget about those minimal pair tests for pronunciation. Wyner has tons of resources for those on his website.
Oh, right. Those recordings and exercises for all sorts of languages.
Yeah, really helpful for targeting those tricky sounds.
And, of course, we can't forget about our friend Google Images for exploring word meanings.
Right.
Getting that visual context.
It's become my new favorite study buddy.
Mine too. And then there are those monolingual dictionaries.
Yeah, those are still a bit daunting for me, I have to admit.
I get it. But they really are the key to thinking in the target language.
Right, pushing past that translation crutch.
Exactly. And start simple. Use Google Translate to help you if needed.
Go be baby steps.
Baby steps. And then, of course, immerse yourself in authentic materials. Books, TV shows, music conversations with native speakers.
Surround yourself with the language.
Exactly. And, if you're feeling really adventurous, you could even try an immersion program.
Live in the country where the language is spoken.
Yeah, really dive in head first. But even without traveling abroad, you can create that immersive environment at home.
Right, with all the resources we have available these days.
Exactly. So there you have it, folks.
Yeah.
The tools, the strategies, the roadmap to fluency.
It's all there for the taking.
It is.
But, beyond all the technical stuff, I think Wyner really emphasizes one key ingredient: belief. It's about believing in yourself and your ability to learn.
Yeah, he really hammers that home.
He does. He says it's not about age or background or even talent.
It's about mindset.
Right. It's about embracing the challenge and having fun along the way.
Because, let's face it, learning a new language is a journey.
It is. It's a journey with ups and downs and twists and turns.
But it's a journey that's ultimately incredibly rewarding.
It is. It's about opening yourself up to new cultures, new perspectives, new ways of seeing the world.
It's about connecting with people on a deeper level.
And maybe even discovering a hidden part of yourself along the way.
Absolutely. So go forth, language learners. Embrace the challenge, have fun, and remember, Fluent Forever is your guide.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into Fluent Forever by Gabriel Wyner.
We hope you enjoyed it.
Until next time,
Sure.
keep diving deep and keep those languages flowing.